You begin to notice something subtle, a pattern that has always been there, quietly shaping your reactions, your expectations, your sense of worth. It feels familiar, almost comfortable, but also limiting. This is the first awakening, the moment you realize your thoughts are not entirely your own, and something within you starts to observe instead of react. A distance is created, and in that space, awareness is born. There is something you have been feeling for a long time but never fully named. A quiet tension, a subtle dissatisfaction, as if something in your life is slightly out of alignment, even when everything appears fine on the surface. You smile. You respond. You move forward. But underneath it all, there is a question you keep avoiding. Why does this feel incomplete? And the truth is, it's not about what you have or don't have. It's not about who loves you or who doesn't. It's something deeper. It's the way you experience yourself. Because the way you experience yourself quietly shapes the way others experience you. And you've been living inside a pattern, so familiar that you stop noticing it. A pattern of thought. A pattern of reaction. A pattern of expectation. You didn't choose it consciously. You absorbed it, slowly, over time. From moments you barely remember. From words you once believed. From feelings you didn't know how to process. And now, it runs in the background of your mind, like a silent program, telling you who you are, telling you what you deserve, telling you how much love you're allowed to receive. You may not hear it clearly, but you feel it. In the hesitation before you speak. In the doubt after someone compliments you. In the way you question affection, even when it's genuine. And so, you begin to chase something. Not love itself, but confirmation. Proof that you are enough. Proof that you are worthy. Proof that you can be chosen. But no matter how much you receive, it never fully settles inside you. Because the pattern is still there, quietly filtering everything. You see, your mind is not just reacting to reality. It is interpreting it through a lens that was formed long ago. A lens built from repetition. And repetition becomes belief. Belief becomes identity. And identity becomes your reality. So even when love is present, if your inner system is programmed to expect its absence, you will find a way to doubt it. Not because you want to, but because it feels familiar. And the mind always returns to what feels familiar, even if it hurts. This is the part no one tells you. You are not just seeking love. You are recreating emotional patterns. Again, and again, and again. Different people, same feeling. Different situations, same outcome. And at some point, a realization begins to form. Maybe it's not them. Maybe it's not circumstances. Maybe it's something within you, repeating itself. And for a moment, this realization feels uncomfortable. Because it shifts responsibility. But it also introduces something powerful. Choice. Because if a pattern was learned, it can be unlearned. If a belief was installed, it can be rewritten. Your mind is not fixed. It is programmable. And you are both the observer and the architect. But first, you must see clearly. Not judge. Not resist. Just see. Notice the thoughts that appear automatically. I'm not enough. They will leave. I have to prove myself. Notice how quickly they arise. And how naturally you accept them. As if they are facts. But they are not facts. They are echoes. Echoes of past experiences, repeating in the present moment. And the more you believe them, the more real they feel. But something shifts when you pause. When you don't immediately react. When you simply observe. A small gap appears between you and the thought. And in that gap, something new becomes possible. Awareness. Awareness is not loud. It doesn't force change. It simply reveals. It shows you that you are not the voice in your head. You are the one hearing it. And once you realize this, the control begins to return. Gently. Quietly. You start to question what once felt absolute. You start to choose what once felt automatic. And this is where reprogramming begins. Not through force, but through repetition, with intention. You introduce new thoughts. Not aggressively, but consistently. I am enough, as I am. I am safe in being myself. I do not need to earn love. At first, they feel unfamiliar. Maybe even untrue. But that's because your system is still calibrated to the old pattern. So you don't fight the resistance. You allow it, and continue. Because every time you choose a new thought, you are writing new code. And the subconscious mind responds to repetition, not intensity. So you repeat, softly, daily, patiently. And something begins to shift. Not all at once, but subtly. You notice you don't react the same way. You don't chase as much. You don't overanalyze every word, every silence. There is space now. And in that space, there is calm. A quiet sense of stability that doesn't depend on anyone else. And this is new. Because for so long, your sense of self was tied to external validation. But now, it starts to come from within. You begin to feel grounded. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer at war with yourself. And this changes everything. Because the way you relate to yourself sets the tone for every relationship in your life. When you stop seeking approval, you start experiencing connection differently. Not from lack, but from wholeness. And from this place, love feels different. It's not something you chase. It's something you allow. And more importantly, something you recognize. Because now, you are no longer filtering it through old wounds. You are seeing it as it is. And receiving it without fear. But this transformation is not something you think your way into. It's something you practice. Gently. Every day. You begin with awareness. You pause before reacting. You question automatic thoughts. You replace them with intentional ones. And you repeat. Until the new becomes familiar. Until the unfamiliar becomes natural. And slowly, your identity begins to shift. You are no longer the person who doubts themselves constantly. You are no longer the one who needs reassurance to feel stable. You are becoming someone else. Someone who observes instead of reacts. Someone who chooses instead of defaults. Someone who understands that their inner world shapes everything. And as this realization deepens, a new question begins to form. If your thoughts are not you, if your patterns can change, then who are you beneath all of it? This question doesn't need an immediate answer. It simply opens a door into deeper awareness. Because what you are discovering is just the beginning. There are layers within you, still unseen. Patterns even more subtle. Beliefs even more hidden. And as you continue to observe, to question, to reprogram, you move closer to something real. Something stable. Something true. Not the version of you that was created by past experiences, but the one that exists beyond them. And as you sit with this awareness, you start to feel a quiet shift. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, but undeniable. Like something within you is waking up. And it's been waiting for this moment all along. There is a voice inside you, soft, repetitive, unquestioned. It tells you what you deserve, what you lack, what you must prove. For years you've mistaken it for truth. But now you begin to hear it differently. Not as authority, but as a program waiting to be rewritten. There is a voice inside you that you rarely question. It does not shout. It does not demand attention. It simply speaks, quietly, consistently, as if it has always been right. And because it has always been there, you have learned to trust it. You don't remember choosing it. You don't remember agreeing with it. But you follow it. It tells you who you are. It tells you what you deserve. It tells you how far you can go, and where you should stop. And the most powerful part is this. You think it's you. You think these thoughts are your truth. You think these judgments are your identity. But what if they are not? What if this voice is not your essence, but your conditioning? Because if you listen closely, really closely, you will begin to notice something subtle. The voice repeats itself. Not creatively, not consciously, but mechanically, like a script, running on a loop. The same doubts, the same fears, the same quiet limitations, dressed in different situations. I'm not enough. I'll be rejected. I need to prove myself. Different moments, same message. And for a long time, you believed it without question. You built your choices around it. You shaped your behavior through it. You adjusted yourself to fit the expectations it created. And slowly, without realizing it, you began to shrink. Not physically, but internally. You held back your thoughts. You softened your presence. You filtered your expression, just to feel accepted. Because the voice told you that being fully yourself was risky. And you believed it. So you tried to become someone else. Someone more acceptable. Someone more worthy. Someone more enough. But no matter how much you adjusted, the voice never changed. It always found something missing. Something to fix. Something to doubt. Something to question. And that's when the exhaustion begins. Not from doing too much, but from never feeling like it's enough. You try harder. You give more. You overthink every detail. And still, the voice whispers the same thing. Not yet. Not enough. Keep proving. And this is where most people stay. Trapped in a loop they cannot see. Trying to fix a feeling without realizing the source. But something in you has started to wake up. You've begun to notice the pattern. Not clearly at first, but subtly. A moment where you pause and question the thought instead of following it. A moment where you hear the voice and feel that it might not be entirely true. And that moment is powerful because it creates distance. A small space between you and the voice. And in that space, awareness begins to grow. You start to observe. Not react. Not judge. Just observe. You notice how quickly the voice speaks. How automatically it labels situations. How confidently it presents assumptions as facts. And slowly, you begin to see it for what it is. A program. Not a truth. Not a permanent identity. But a pattern built through repetition. Because your subconscious mind does not question what is repeated. It accepts. It stores. It reinforces. Every time you thought, I'm not enough, your mind listened. Every time you felt unworthy and didn't challenge it, your mind recorded it. And over time, these repetitions became your internal system. A system that now runs automatically. But here is the shift. If it was programmed, it can be reprogrammed. And this is where your power begins. Not in controlling the voice, but in choosing how you respond to it. Because you don't need to silence it. You need to stop believing it. And that begins with awareness. When the voice says, you're not enough, you don't fight it. You don't suppress it. You simply notice it. And then, you introduce something new. Gently. I am learning to trust myself. Not as a forceful replacement, but as a quiet alternative. And the voice may resist. It may feel unfamiliar. Even uncomfortable. Because your system is used to the old pattern. But you don't stop. You repeat. Not perfectly, but consistently. Because repetition is the language of the subconscious. You begin to choose your thoughts with intention. Not every thought, but the important ones. The ones that shape how you see yourself. Instead of, I must prove my worth, you begin to think, my worth is not something I prove. Instead of, they might reject me, you begin to think, I accept myself first. And at first, these thoughts feel fragile. Like they don't fully belong yet. But that's okay. Because every belief was once unfamiliar. Even the ones that limit you now. So you stay with it. You observe the old voice. And you introduce the new one. Again, and again, and again. And slowly, something begins to change. The old voice doesn't disappear immediately. But it becomes quieter. Less convincing. Less dominant. And the new voice begins to grow. Not loudly, but steadily. You start to feel a shift. In how you respond. In how you carry yourself. In how you interpret situations. You no longer take every thought as truth. You question. You choose. You redirect. And this changes your experience in ways you didn't expect. You feel less pressure to perform. Less need to over-explain. Less fear of being misunderstood. Because your sense of self is no longer dependent on that voice. And this is the beginning of transformation. Not a sudden change, but a gradual realignment. You are no longer being controlled by unconscious patterns. You are becoming conscious within them. And from that place, you begin to take control. Gently. Naturally. Without force. Because control does not come from resistance. It comes from awareness. And you practice this in small moments. When you wake up, you choose your first thought. When you feel doubt, you pause instead of reacting. When the voice speaks, you listen, but you don't obey. These small shifts create a new pattern, a new rhythm, a new internal environment. And over time, this becomes your new normal. You begin to trust yourself. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer at the mercy of old programming. You feel more stable, more grounded, more present. And with this presence comes clarity. You start to see how much of your life was shaped by that quiet voice. How many decisions were influenced by it. How many opportunities were filtered through it. And instead of feeling regret, you feel awareness. Because now you see. And seeing changes everything. Because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. And once you stop believing the voice, it loses its power. Not instantly, but inevitably. And as this continues, a deeper question begins to form within you. If this voice was never truly you, if these thoughts were learned, not chosen, then who are you without them? This question does not need an immediate answer. It simply opens a space for something new to emerge, a space where your true identity begins to reveal itself. Not the one shaped by fear, not the one built on doubt, but something quieter, something more stable, something real. And as you sit with this, you begin to feel a subtle shift. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, but steady. Like something within you is reorganizing itself. And the voice, once so dominant, is no longer in control. Still speaks, but now you decide what it means. You notice the cycle, the longing, the effort, the temporary satisfaction. Then the emptiness returns, stronger, deeper. It's not the world failing you, it's a pattern within you repeating itself. You begin to question the chase itself. And in that question, something powerful begins to shift. There is a pattern in your life that feels almost invisible, yet it shapes everything. You feel it in the moments of wanting, in the quiet desire for something more, something better, something that finally feels complete. You move toward it with hope. You invest your energy. You give your attention, your time, your emotion. And for a moment, it works. You feel something close to fulfillment. A brief sense of arrival. A soft whisper inside you that says, "This is it." But then, slowly, almost quietly, it fades. The feeling slips away. The certainty dissolves. And in its place, something familiar returns. An emptiness. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep. And the cycle begins again. You search. You reach. You chase. Hoping that this time, it will last. But it never does. And this is where confusion begins. Because from the outside, it looks like progress. You're doing more. Trying more. Experiencing more. But inside, something feels unchanged. Like you are moving in circles, instead of forward. And at some point, a question begins to rise. Not loudly, but persistently. Why does nothing ever feel enough? This question is not comfortable. Because it challenges something deeper than circumstances. It touches the pattern itself. For a long time, you believed the answer was outside. That the right person, the right success, the right moment, would finally fill that space within you. And so, you adjusted your path. You tried different things, different people, different versions of yourself. But the outcome remained the same. Temporary satisfaction, followed by quiet emptiness. And now, something shifts. Not in the world around you, but within you. You begin to look inward. Not to blame yourself, but to understand. Because what if the problem is not what you are chasing, but the act of chasing itself? What if the feeling you are seeking cannot be found through pursuit? This realization is subtle, but powerful. Because it turns your attention away from the external and toward the internal. You begin to observe your own patterns. The way you anticipate fulfillment. The way you attach meaning to outcomes. The way you expect something outside of you to complete something within you. And slowly, you begin to see it. The pattern is not in what you want. It is in how you want. There is a sense of lack built into the desire itself. A quiet assumption that something is missing. And every time you chase, you reinforce that assumption. Because chasing implies absence. It tells your mind, I don't have this. I need this. I will be complete when I get this. And your subconscious listens. It accepts this message and builds around it. So even when you achieve what you were chasing, the underlying belief remains. I am not complete yet. And so, the feeling fades. Because the system is still running the same code. This is the cycle. Not of failure, but of repetition. A loop created by belief, sustained by behavior. And once you see this, something changes. You stop blaming the outcome. You start questioning the process. Why do you feel the need to chase? What are you trying to prove? What feeling are you hoping to reach? And as you sit with these questions, a deeper awareness begins to emerge. You realize that what you are truly seeking is not the thing itself. It is the feeling you believe it will give you. Validation, security, worth. But these are not things that can be permanently given from the outside. Because anything external can change. And when it does, the feeling goes with it. So the mind returns to searching. Again and again. Until something interrupts the cycle. And that interruption is awareness. You begin to see the pattern as it happens. Not after, but during. You feel the urge to chase, and you pause. You notice the expectation forming, and you question it. You recognize the familiar emotional pull, and you don't immediately follow it. And in that moment, something new appears. Space. A space between impulse and action. And in that space, you have a choice. You can continue the pattern, or you can step outside of it. This is where reprogramming begins. Not by rejecting desire, but by changing your relationship with it. You stop chasing from lack, and begin to move from awareness. Instead of thinking, I need this to feel complete, You begin to think, I choose this, but I am already whole. This is not just a new thought. It is a new foundation. Because now, your actions are not driven by absence. They are guided by intention. And this changes the entire experience. You still pursue. You still create. You still engage with life. But the energy is different. There is no desperation. No silent pressure. No hidden fear of not being enough. Because you are no longer trying to fill a void. You are expressing something that already exists within you. And this shift is subtle, but powerful. You begin to feel less attached to outcomes. Not because you don't care, but because your identity is no longer tied to them. You can experience something without needing it to define you. You can enjoy something without fearing its loss. And this creates a sense of freedom. A quiet stability that was not there before. Because now, your sense of self is not fluctuating with every external change. It is grounded, rooted, steady. And from this place, something unexpected happens. The things you once chased begin to come to you differently. Not because you are forcing them, but because you are no longer resisting yourself. There is alignment between what you feel and what you do, between who you are and how you live. And this alignment creates a new reality. Not instantly, but consistently. You begin to trust yourself more, to listen more deeply, to act with clarity instead of confusion. And this is the beginning of transformation. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. You are no longer trapped in the cycle. You are aware of it. And awareness breaks repetition. But this is not something that happens once. It is a practice. A daily return to presence. You notice when the old urge appears. You feel it without becoming it. You breathe and choose differently. Again and again. And over time, the pattern weakens. Not because you fought it, but because you stopped feeding it. And in its place, a new pattern forms. One based on wholeness, on self-trust, on quiet certainty. You are no longer searching for something to complete you. You are becoming someone who is already complete. And from that place, everything changes. The way you think, the way you feel, the way you connect. Because now, you are not chasing love. You are experiencing it without fear. And as this understanding deepens, another layer begins to reveal itself. Because the cycle was never just about what you chase. It was also about what you have become in the process of chasing. Your emotions feel real, intense, undeniable. But what if they are also familiar loops your mind has learned to crave? You start to see how pain, rejection, and doubt have become strangely comfortable. Not because you want them, but because you know them. And breaking this cycle requires something deeper than willpower. There is something about your emotions that feels undeniable. When they rise, they take over. When they speak, they feel like truth. And when they stay, they begin to define your reality. You don't question them. You feel them. And because you feel them so deeply, you trust them completely. But what if what feels real is not always what is true? What if your emotions are not just responses, but patterns? Patterns that have been repeated so many times. They now feel like part of who you are. You felt certain emotions so often that they have become familiar. And familiarity has a strange power. It makes even discomfort feel like home. You may not like the feeling of rejection, but you recognize it. You may not enjoy doubt, but you understand how it works. You may not want to feel pain, but you know how to exist within it. And because you know it, your mind returns to it. Not consciously, not intentionally, but automatically, like a system following its programming. This is where the struggle begins. Because you believe you are trying to move forward, but something keeps pulling you back. You try to think positively, but the same emotions return. You try to change your behavior, but the same reactions appear. You promise yourself, this time will be different, but somehow it feels the same. And over time, this creates frustration. You begin to question yourself. Why do I keep feeling this way? Why can't I just let it go? Why does this always happen to me? And beneath these questions, there is a quiet exhaustion, not from the emotion itself, but from the repetition of it. Because deep down, you are not just experiencing the emotion, you are reliving it. Again, and again, and again. Different triggers, same feeling. Different situations, same internal response. And this is the moment where awareness begins. You start to notice that your emotions are not random. They follow a pattern, a predictable rhythm, a familiar sequence. Something happens, a thought appears, a feeling rises, and you react. And before you know it, You are inside the same emotional state you've been in before. And once you are inside it, feels real, convincing, overwhelming, true. But now, something shifts. You begin to observe the process, not just the emotion, but what comes before it, the thought, the interpretation, the meaning you assign to the moment. And you realize, the emotion is not the beginning. It is the result, a reaction to a thought that was triggered by a pattern. And that pattern has been repeated enough times to become automatic. This is how the subconscious works. It learns through repetition. It stores through emotion. It reinforces through experience. So every time you felt rejected and believed it meant something about your worth, the pattern strengthened. Every time you doubted yourself and acted from that doubt, the loop deepened. And over time, your mind began to expect these emotions, not because you want them, but because they are known. And the subconscious mind chooses what is known over what is unknown, even if the known is painful. This is the hidden truth. You are not just reacting to life. You are recreating emotional experiences based on what your mind has learned to expect. And once you see this, something changes. You stop fighting the emotion because you understand it is not the enemy. It is the signal, a reflection of a deeper pattern. And instead of trying to suppress it, you begin to explore it. You feel it, but you also observe it. You ask yourself, what thought created this feeling? What belief is behind this reaction? Is this truly happening now, or is this familiar from before? And these questions create space, a space where awareness can enter. And in that awareness, you begin to separate yourself from the emotion. You realize you are not the feeling. You are the one experiencing it. And this distinction is where your power begins. Because once you are no longer identified with the emotion, you can change your relationship with it. Instead of being pulled into it, you can witness it. Instead of reacting immediately, you can pause. And in that pause, you introduce something new, a different thought, a different interpretation, a different response. This is reprogramming, not through force, but through awareness and repetition. You begin to choose thoughts that do not lead back to the same emotional loop. Instead of thinking, this always happens to me, you think, this is a pattern, and I can see it. Instead of, I feel rejected, you think, I am experiencing a familiar response. These shifts may seem small, but they change everything, because they interrupt the automatic process. They stop the loop before it fully forms. And the more you do this, the weaker the pattern becomes. Not instantly, but gradually, you begin to notice that the emotions don't last as long. They don't control you the same way. They arise, but they pass. And in their place, something new begins to form. A sense of stability, a quiet awareness, a deeper control. You are no longer being carried by your emotions. You are experiencing them, without losing yourself in them. And this is the beginning of transformation, because your identity starts to shift. You are no longer the person who is overwhelmed by every feeling. You are becoming someone who understands them, who navigates them, who remains present, even when they arise. And this changes how you move through life. You don't avoid situations out of fear. You don't react impulsively out of habit. You respond with awareness. And this awareness creates freedom. Freedom from repetition. Freedom from unconscious loops. Freedom from emotional patterns that once felt permanent. But this is not something you achieve once. It is something you practice. In small moments, daily. You notice when an emotion begins. You pause, instead of reacting. You trace it back to the thought. And then, you choose. Again, and again. And over time, your system learns something new. It learns that it does not have to return to the old patterns. It learns that there are other ways to respond, other ways to feel, other ways to be. And slowly, what once felt automatic becomes optional. And what once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. And in this shift, you begin to feel something you haven't felt before. Not excitement, not intensity, but calm. A steady, grounded calm. The kind that doesn't depend on circumstances. The kind that comes from within. And as this calm deepens, you begin to trust yourself more. Not because you control everything, but because you understand what is happening within you. And this understanding is what gives you real control. Because now, you are no longer reacting blindly. You are responding consciously. And this changes everything. Because when you change how you respond, you change the outcome. Not just externally, but internally. And as this continues, Another realization begins to emerge. If your emotions were patterns, if your reactions were learned, then what you have been calling yourself may not be fixed at all. It may be something that was built over time. And if it was built, it can be rebuilt, not by force, but by awareness. And as you sit with this thought, you begin to feel something shift, not dramatically, but deeply, like something within you is becoming more clear, more stable, more real. And for the first time, you are not afraid of your emotions, because you understand them. And understanding removes fear. You are not just thinking thoughts, you are being someone. An identity shaped by repetition, memory, and unconscious belief. It feels like you, but is it truly chosen? You begin to see the layers, the roles, the masks. And the question arises, who are you beneath all of this? There is a version of you that you have been living as for so long that you no longer question it. It feels natural, feels familiar, feels like you. But what if this version is not who you truly are? What if it is something you became slowly, unconsciously, through repetition? Because you are not just thinking thoughts. You are being someone. A personality shaped by patterns. A character built from memories. An identity formed through beliefs you did not consciously choose. And over time, this identity has become automatic. You don't decide how to react. You don't choose how to feel. You simply become what you have practiced being. Again, and again, and again. This is where the illusion begins. Because repetition creates familiarity. And familiarity feels like truth. So the identity you have practiced starts to feel like your essence. But it is not fixed. It is constructed. And what is constructed can be changed. But first, you must see it. You must step outside of the role and observe the character you have been playing. Notice how you describe yourself. I'm not confident. I overthink everything. I always get this wrong. These are not just thoughts. They are identity statements. They define who you believe you are. And once you believe them, you begin to act accordingly. Not because you have to, but because your mind seeks consistency. If you believe you are someone who hesitates, you will hesitate. If you believe you are someone who is not enough, you will look for proof. And every time you act in alignment with these beliefs, the identity becomes stronger, more real, more solid, until it feels unchangeable. But now, something shifts. You begin to question it. Not aggressively, but curiously. Is this really me? Or is this something I've learned to be? And this question creates space. A space between you and the identity. And in that space, you begin to see the layers. The roles you play in different situations. The masks you wear around different people. The versions of yourself that appear, depending on what is expected. You are not the same in every environment. You adjust. You adapt. You become. And this reveals something important. Your identity is not singular. It is flexible, shifting, responsive, which means it is not fixed. It is a system. A collection of patterns, running automatically. And once you see it this way, you realize something powerful. You are not the system. You are the one operating it. But for a long time, you have been on autopilot, running the same programs, repeating the same responses, reinforcing the same identity. Not because you chose it, but because it was familiar. And the subconscious mind prefers what is familiar, even if it limits you. This is why change feels difficult. Not because you are incapable, but because your system is designed to maintain consistency. It wants to protect the identity you've built. Even if that identity holds you back. Even if that identity keeps you small. Because to the subconscious, familiar equals safe. So when you try to change, when you try to think differently, when you try to act outside of your usual pattern, there is resistance. A quiet discomfort. A feeling that says, this is not you. But what you are really feeling is the system being challenged. The old code being questioned. And this is where reprogramming begins. Not by rejecting your current identity, but by understanding it. You observe it, without judgment, without frustration. You simply notice how you think, how you react, how you define yourself. And as you observe, you begin to separate. You realize you are not the label. You are not the pattern. You are not the past. You are the awareness behind all of it. And from this awareness, you can choose something new, but not all at once, not forcefully, gently, intentionally. You begin to introduce new identity statements, not as lies, but as possibilities. I am learning to trust myself. I am becoming more confident. I am allowed to change. These statements may feel unfamiliar, because they do not match your current identity. But that's exactly why they matter. Because every identity begins with repetition. So you repeat. Not to convince yourself instantly, but to begin the process. You think differently. Even when it feels unnatural. You act differently. Even when it feels uncomfortable. You choose differently. Even when the old pattern calls you back. And slowly, the system begins to adapt. The new thoughts become less foreign. The new actions become more natural. The new identity begins to form. Not as an idea, but as an experience. You start to notice small changes. Moments where you respond differently. Moments where you feel more in control. Moments where you don't fall into the old role. And these moments matter. Because they are evidence. Evidence that you are not fixed. Evidence that you are changing. And as this evidence builds, your belief begins to shift. You no longer see yourself as someone trapped in patterns. You begin to see yourself as someone evolving, someone aware, someone intentional. And this changes how you move through life. You are no longer reacting from identity. You are choosing from awareness. And this is where real transformation happens. Not when you force yourself to be different, but when you understand that you already can be. Because identity is not something you discover. It is something you create. Moment by moment, choice by choice, thought by thought. And as you continue this process, you begin to feel something new. Not pressure, not confusion, but clarity. A quiet understanding that you are not limited to who you have been. And with that understanding comes freedom. Freedom to redefine yourself. Freedom to step outside old roles. Freedom to become something new without guilt. Because you are not abandoning yourself. You are uncovering yourself. And as this realization deepens, a question begins to emerge. If all these layers, all these roles, all these identities were learned, then what exists beneath them? Who are you? When there is no label to hold on to. Who are you? When there is no pattern to follow. This question is not meant to be answered immediately. It is meant to be felt, to be explored, to be experienced. Because beneath the identity, there is something quieter, something more stable, something that does not change, even when everything else does. And as you sit with this awareness, you begin to feel it, not clearly, but subtly, a sense of presence, a sense of being, without definition. And in that space, you are no longer performing. You are simply existing. And this is where your true power begins. For so long you've tried to fix yourself, correct yourself, control yourself. But the resistance only made the noise louder. Now something different happens. You pause. You stop pushing and start observing with quiet acceptance. And in that stillness your mind begins to soften and open. For a long time, you believed that something about you needed to be fixed. Not completely broken, but slightly off, slightly incomplete, slightly wrong. And so, you tried. You tried to think better, to act better, to become better. You watched yourself closely. You corrected your thoughts. You questioned your reactions. You pushed yourself to improve, to evolve, to finally become someone who felt enough. And at first, it seemed like the right approach, because effort feels productive, control feels powerful, and fixing feels like progress. But beneath all of it, something else was happening. The more you tried to control your mind, the louder it became. The more you resisted certain thoughts, the stronger they returned. The more you tried to silence your emotions, the more intense they felt. It was as if your mind was pushing back. And this created a new kind of tension. Not just the original struggle, but the struggle against the struggle. A constant inner resistance. You fighting your thoughts. You correcting your feelings. You trying to manage every part of yourself. And over time, this becomes exhausting. Because you are no longer just living. You are constantly monitoring, constantly adjusting, constantly trying to stay in control. And yet, the control never feels complete. There is always something to fix, something to improve, something to correct. And this creates a quiet frustration. Because no matter how much you try, you never fully arrive. You are always becoming, but never being. And then, something shifts. Not through effort, but through exhaustion. You reach a moment where you simply stop. Not because everything is resolved, but because you can't keep pushing the same way. And in that moment, something unexpected happens. You pause. Not to fix, not to analyze, but simply to observe. You notice the thoughts, without trying to change them. You feel the emotions, without trying to suppress them. You allow everything to exist, just as it is. And at first, this feels unfamiliar, because you are used to reacting, used to correcting, used to controlling. But now, you are doing something different. You are witnessing. And this changes everything. Because when you stop resisting, the intensity begins to soften. Not immediately, but gradually. The thoughts lose some of their urgency. The emotions lose some of their weight. Because they are no longer being pushed against. You see, resistance feeds the pattern. It gives it energy. It makes it stronger. But observation does something else. It allows the pattern to reveal itself, without interference. And as you observe, you begin to understand. You see how your mind operates, how thoughts arise, automatically, how emotions follow, predictably. You see the system, not as something to fight, but as something to learn from. And this learning creates a new kind of awareness, a calm awareness, one that does not rush to change, but simply notices. And in this noticing, there is space. Space between you and the thought. Space between you and the reaction. And in that space, there is choice. For the first time, you are not immediately pulled into the pattern. You see it before it fully takes over. And this is where something deeper begins. Because now, you are no longer identified with everything that happens in your mind. You are aware of it. And awareness is the beginning of freedom. Because you cannot change what you are unconscious of. But once you see it, you are no longer controlled by it in the same way. And from this awareness, a different kind of transformation begins. Not through force, but through acceptance. You stop trying to fix every thought. You stop trying to control every feeling. You allow them to exist, without giving them authority. And this changes your relationship with yourself. You are no longer an enemy to be corrected. You are something to be understood. And this understanding creates compassion, not as an idea, but as an experience. You begin to treat your mind with patience. You begin to meet your emotions with curiosity. And this softens everything. The tension fades. The pressure lifts. The constant need to improve quiets down. And in its place, there is stillness. A quiet, steady presence. And in that stillness, your mind begins to reorganize itself. Because when there is no resistance, there is no conflict. And when there is no conflict, there is clarity. You start to see which thoughts are useful, and which are not. You start to feel which emotions pass naturally, and which are held by resistance. And this clarity guides you, gently, without force. You no longer need to control everything, because you understand what is happening. And understanding creates a different kind of control, a softer control, one that comes from awareness, not pressure. And this is where reprogramming becomes natural. You don't force new thoughts. You allow them to arise from a place of clarity. You don't push away old patterns. You simply stop feeding them with resistance. And over time, they begin to fade, not because you fought them, but because you no longer sustain them. And as this continues, your identity begins to shift. You are no longer the person who is constantly fixing themselves. You are becoming someone who observes, who understands, who allows. And this identity feels different, lighter, calmer, more stable, because it is not built on effort. It is built on awareness. And from this place, your actions begin to change, not because you force them, but because they naturally align. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of default. And this creates a new pattern, one that is not driven by resistance, but guided by presence. And this pattern becomes your new way of being. But this is not something you achieve once. It is something you return to, again and again. You practice pausing. You practice observing. You practice allowing. In small moments, when a thought arises, you notice it. When an emotion appears, you feel it without judgment. When the urge to control returns, you gently step back. And each time you do this, you strengthen awareness. You deepen stillness. You create space. And in that space, your mind continues to soften, to open, to evolve, not through pressure, but through presence. And as you sit with this, you begin to realize something deeper. You were never meant to fight yourself. You were meant to understand yourself. And this understanding changes everything. Because now, you are no longer divided within. You are aligned, not perfectly, but naturally. And from this alignment, a new sense of peace begins to emerge. Quiet, steady, unforced. And as this peace deepens, you begin to feel something else. Something subtle, but powerful. A sense that you are no longer searching, no longer fixing, no longer resisting. You are simply here, aware, present, and open. Beneath your awareness lies a deeper system, silently running everything. This is where your beliefs live, where your reality begins. Now you start to access it, not with force but with intention. You introduce new thoughts, gently, repeatedly. And slowly, the old patterns begin to lose their power. There is a part of your mind that you do not see, but it shapes everything you experience. It does not speak loudly. It does not ask for attention. Yet it quietly decides how you feel, how you react, how you interpret your world. This is the deeper system. The one beneath your awareness. The place where your beliefs live. And whether you realize it or not, it has been guiding you for a long time. Every reaction that feels automatic. Every thought that appears without effort. Every emotion that seems to rise on its own. Comes from this place. Not randomly, but precisely. Because this system is not chaotic. It is programmed. Programmed through repetition. Programmed through experience. Programmed through what you have consistently believed to be true. And once something is accepted as true, your subconscious builds around it. It organizes your perceptions. It filters your reality. It creates patterns that match that belief. So if somewhere within you, there is a belief that you are not enough, this system will quietly look for evidence. It will highlight moments that confirm it. It will ignore moments that contradict it. And over time, it will make that belief feel real. Not because it is true, but because it is repeated. And this is where the struggle begins. Because on the surface, you may want something different. You may want confidence. You may want peace. You may want to feel whole. But beneath the surface, the deeper system is still running the old code. And so, there is conflict. You try to think positively, but something pulls you back. You try to change your behavior, but the same patterns appear. You try to move forward, but it feels like something unseen is holding you in place. And for a long time, this feels confusing, because you don't understand the source. You think it's a lack of effort. You think it's inconsistency. You think it's something you're doing wrong. But the truth is, you have been trying to change the surface, while the system underneath remains the same. And now, something shifts. You begin to realize that real change does not happen through force. It happens through access. Access to the deeper system. Not by fighting it, but by understanding how it works. Because this system does not respond to pressure. It responds to repetition. It responds to emotion. It responds to consistency. And once you see this, you stop trying to control everything at once. You begin to work with the system. Instead of against it, you start by becoming aware. Not just of your thoughts, but of the patterns behind them. You notice what you believe about yourself. Not occasionally, but consistently. You listen to the quiet assumptions that guide your behavior. I'm not ready. This won't last. I have to earn this. These beliefs may not always be spoken, but they are always present. And once you see them, you begin to understand the system. You realize that your reality is not just happening to you. It is being filtered through what you believe. And this awareness gives you something powerful. Just because if beliefs create patterns, then new beliefs can create new patterns. But not instantly, not forcefully, gently, repeatedly. You begin to introduce new thoughts, not as declarations, but as possibilities. I am learning to trust myself. I am allowed to feel secure. I can experience life without fear. At first, these thoughts may feel unfamiliar, because they do not match the existing code. But that is part of the process. You are not replacing everything at once. You are introducing something new into a system that has been running the same program for years. And the system resists, not because it is against you, but because it is designed to maintain consistency. It prefers what it knows, even if what it knows is limiting. So you don't force the change. You don't expect immediate results. You simply repeat, gently, daily, without pressure, because repetition is how the subconscious learns. And every time you choose a new thought, you are writing new code. Every time you feel a different emotion, you are reinforcing a new pattern. Every time you respond differently, you are shifting the system. And slowly, something begins to change. Not dramatically, but subtly. You notice that certain thoughts don't appear as often. You notice that certain reactions feel less automatic. You notice that you have more space between what happens and how you respond. And in that space, there is power. Because now, you are not being controlled by the system. You are influencing it, and this influence grows. The more you repeat the new patterns, the stronger they become. The more you return to awareness, the clearer everything feels. And over time, the old patterns begin to fade. Not because you fought them, but because you stopped reinforcing them. They lose their strength, their urgency, their hold on you. And in their place, a new system begins to form. One that is aligned with what you choose, not what you inherited. And this is where transformation becomes real. Because now, your identity begins to shift. You are no longer the person shaped entirely by past beliefs. You are becoming someone who creates new ones. Someone who understands the system. Someone who works with it, instead of being controlled by it. And this creates a new kind of confidence. Not loud, not forced, but steady. Because it is built on understanding, not effort. And from this place, your actions begin to change naturally. You don't hesitate as much. You don't doubt as deeply. You don't react as quickly. Because your internal system is no longer sending the same signals. It is evolving. And you are guiding that evolution. Not perfectly, but intentionally. And this intention is what makes the difference. Because now, you are not waiting for change to happen. You are creating it, moment by moment, thought by thought, pattern by pattern. And as you continue this process, you begin to feel something new, a sense of alignment, where your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions begin to move in the same direction. And this alignment creates ease, not because life is perfect, but because you are no longer in conflict with yourself. And in this ease, your mind becomes more open, more receptive, more responsive. And this openness allows even deeper change to occur. Because now, you are not just adjusting the surface, you are reshaping the foundation. And as this foundation shifts, everything built on it begins to change. Your perceptions, your reactions, your experiences, all of it begins to reflect the new system. And as you sit with this awareness, you begin to realize something profound. You have always had access to this. The ability to influence your inner world. The ability to guide your own patterns. The ability to reshape your beliefs. It was never outside of you. It was simply unnoticed. And now that you see it, you cannot unsee it. And this changes everything. You begin to feel a shift, subtle but undeniable. The need for validation starts to loosen its grip. You are no longer performing, no longer proving. Instead, you are simply being. And from this place, something deeper than confidence begins to emerge. There is a moment in your journey that is easy to miss, because it does not arrive with noise. It does not announce itself. It does not demand your attention. It simply appears, quietly. A subtle shift. At first, you may not even recognize it. But something feels different. The urgency you once carried begins to soften. The constant need to prove yourself begins to fade. The quiet pressure to be seen a certain way loosens its grip. And in its place, there is space. A calm, unfamiliar space. For so long, you have been performing. Not always consciously. Not always intentionally. But deeply. You adjusted your words. You shaped your reactions. You filtered your expression based on how you thought you would be perceived. You learned what was acceptable, what was appreciated, what was rewarded. And slowly, you became someone who was always aware of being observed, even when no one was watching. Because the need for validation had moved inward. It was no longer just about others. It was about how you saw yourself through the imagined eyes of others. And this created a quiet tension, a constant awareness of yourself as an image. How am I coming across? Am I enough? Do they approve? These questions became part of your internal dialogue, so natural that you stopped noticing them. But they shaped everything. The way you spoke, the way you acted, the way you felt about yourself. And over time, this created a pattern of seeking, not just connection, but confirmation. You were not just being. You were performing for acceptance. And the more you performed, the more you depended on the response. If it was positive, you felt momentarily secure. If it was absent, you felt uncertain. And so, your sense of self became unstable. Not because you lacked value, but because your value was tied to something outside of you. Something that could change at any moment. And now, something begins to shift. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. Through awareness, through observation, through repetition, you have started to reprogram your inner system. And as that system changes, so does your relationship with validation. You begin to notice that you don't seek it the same way. The urge is still there, but it is weaker. less urgent, less controlling. You catch yourself before you adjust too much, before you filter your expression, before you seek approval without realizing it. And in that moment, you pause, not to correct, but to choose. You allow yourself to speak as you are, to respond as you feel, to exist without constant adjustment. And this feels different. At first, it may feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because you are stepping outside of a pattern that has been repeated for a long time. But you stay with it. You allow the discomfort without retreating. And slowly, something begins to settle. You realize that nothing breaks, nothing collapses. You are still here. And more importantly, you feel more real, less filtered, less controlled, less divided. And this is where the transformation deepens, because you are no longer splitting yourself between who you are and who you think you should be. You are becoming whole, not perfect, but aligned. And from this alignment, something new begins to emerge. It is not confidence, as you once understood it. It is quieter than that, more stable, less dependent on outcomes. It is a sense of self that does not need constant reinforcement, a feeling of enoughness that does not require proof. And this changes everything, because when you no longer need validation, you begin to experience life differently. You listen more deeply. Instead of waiting for approval, you express more freely. Instead of calculating responses, you connect more authentically, instead of performing roles. And this authenticity creates a different kind of connection, one that is not based on performance, but on presence. And presence is powerful, because it allows you to experience life as it is, not through filters, not through expectations, but directly. And this direct experience creates clarity. You begin to see what truly resonates with you, what truly matters, what truly feels aligned, not based on what is accepted, but based on what is real. And this clarity strengthens your sense of self. You trust yourself more, not because you have all the answers, but because you are no longer disconnected from yourself. You are listening, you are feeling, you are responding from within. And this inner connection is what replaces the need for external validation. Because when you are connected to yourself, you no longer need constant confirmation. You know, not intellectually, but intuitively. And this knowing is steady. It does not fluctuate with opinions. It does not depend on reactions. It simply exists. And as this becomes your new foundation, your identity continues to shift. You are no longer the person who seeks approval to feel secure. You are becoming someone who is secure, and therefore does not seek approval. And this shift is subtle, but powerful, because it changes the direction of your energy. You are no longer reaching outward, trying to receive something. You are grounded inward, expressing what is already there. And this expression feels effortless, not forced, not calculated, natural. And in this natural state, there is a sense of freedom, a release from the constant need to manage how you are perceived, a release from the pressure to be something for someone else. You are simply being. And in this being, there is peace, not perfect peace, but a deeper calm, a sense that you are no longer chasing yourself. You are present with yourself, and this presence continues to grow. The more you allow it, the more it expands, and with it, your life begins to feel different, less controlled by fear, less driven by validation, more guided by awareness. And this awareness becomes your new center, your new reference point, your new foundation. And from here, you begin to move through the world with a different energy, not seeking, but allowing, not proving, but expressing, not performing, but being. And this changes not only how you feel, but how you connect, because now, you are not showing a version of yourself. You are showing yourself. And this invites something deeper, something more real. But this is just the beginning, because as the need for validation fades, another layer begins to reveal itself, a deeper level of control, not over others, but over yourself. And as you begin to explore that, you realize there is still more to understand. Your emotions no longer control you the way they once did. You feel them, but you are not consumed by them. There is space now between feeling and reaction. In that space you choose. And with each choice, your inner power becomes stronger, steadier, real. There was a time when your emotions felt like commands. When they rose, you followed. When they pulled, you moved. When they overwhelmed, you disappeared inside them. You didn't question them. You didn't pause. You simply became them. If you felt doubt, you hesitated. If you felt fear, you withdrew. If you felt hurt, you closed yourself. And in those moments, it felt automatic. As if there was no space between what you felt and what you did. Because for a long time, there wasn't. Your emotions and your reactions were connected by habit. A pattern repeated so often, it became immediate, instant, invisible. But something has changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. You begin to notice a gap. A small pause between the feeling and the response. At first, it is barely there. A fraction of a moment. A quiet hesitation. But it is enough. Enough to see what is happening. Enough to realize that you have a choice. And this changes everything. Because before, you were inside the emotion. Now, you are aware of it. You feel it, but you are not lost in it. And this awareness creates distance. A gentle separation between you and what you feel. Not to avoid it. Not to suppress it. But to see it clearly. You begin to experience your emotions differently. They still arise. They still move through you. But they no longer define you. They pass, instead of taking over. And this creates something new. A sense of stability. Not because the emotions are gone, but because you are no longer controlled by them. And this stability is where your power begins to grow. Because in that space, you choose. You choose how to respond. You choose what to believe. You choose what direction to move. And each time you choose consciously, you strengthen something within you. A quiet inner control. Not forceful. Not rigid. But steady. Reliable. Real. And this is very different from what you once believed control to be. Before, control meant suppression. Holding things in. Pushing things away. Trying to manage every feeling. But now, control means awareness. It means allowing the emotion. Without being driven by it. It means feeling fully. Without reacting automatically. And this shift is what changes your experience. Because when you are no longer reacting unconsciously, you are no longer repeating the same patterns. You are interrupting them. Gently. Consistently. And over time, they begin to weaken. Not because you fought them, but because you stopped feeding them. You stopped reinforcing the connection between feeling and reaction. And this breaks the loop. You begin to notice moments where you would have reacted before. But now, you pause. You feel the emotion rise. You observe it. You breathe. And instead of following it, you choose something different. A different thought. A different response. A different direction. And in that moment, you feel something shift. A sense of control that is calm, not forced. A sense of power that is quiet, not loud. And this power grows with repetition. Because each time you choose consciously, you are reinforcing a new pattern, a new connection, one that is based on awareness, not habit. And slowly, this becomes your new way of being. You are no longer reactive. You are responsive. You are no longer controlled by emotions. You are guided by awareness. And this changes how you move through life. Situations that once overwhelmed you now feel manageable. Triggers that once controlled you now feel less intense. Because you are no longer meeting them from a place of unconscious reaction. You are meeting them from a place of presence. And presence changes everything. Because when you are present, you are not trapped in the past. You are not projecting into the future. You are here, aware, grounded. And from this place, you have access to something powerful. Choice. Real choice. Not the illusion of choice, but the ability to respond with clarity. And this clarity creates a new experience of yourself. You begin to trust your responses. Not because they are perfect, but because they are conscious. You begin to feel more stable. Not because life is controlled, but because you are. And this control is internal. It is not about controlling others. It is not about controlling outcomes. It is about guiding yourself, your thoughts, your reactions, your direction. And this guidance becomes your strength. Because no matter what happens externally, you know you can return to this space, this pause, this awareness, this choice. And in that knowing, there is confidence. Not loud, not visible, but deep, unshakable. Because it is built on experience. You have felt yourself change. You have seen your reactions shift. You have noticed the patterns breaking. And this evidence strengthens your belief, not in the world, but in yourself. And this belief is what transforms your identity. You are no longer someone who is controlled by emotions. You are someone who experiences them and chooses beyond them. And this identity feels different, stronger, calmer, more grounded, because it is not based on avoidance. It is based on understanding. And as this understanding deepens, you begin to realize something even more profound. Your emotions were never the problem. They were signals, guides, indicators of what was happening within you. And now, you can listen to them, without being led by them. You can feel them, without losing yourself in them. And this changes your relationship with yourself. You are no longer afraid of what you feel. You are curious. You are aware. You are in control. And this control is not about restriction. It is about freedom. The freedom to choose your response. The freedom to direct your energy. The freedom to remain grounded, no matter what arises. And this freedom becomes your foundation, a steady place within yourself. And from this place, your life begins to shift, not because everything changes, but because you do. You move differently. You think differently. You respond differently. And these differences create new outcomes, new experiences, new patterns. And all of it begins with that simple space between feeling and reaction. And as you continue to live from that space, you begin to feel something deeper, a sense of completeness, not dependent on anything outside of you, not waiting for something to happen, but present, right now. And in this presence, there is peace, not perfect peace, but real peace, the kind that comes from within, the kind that grows, the more you return to yourself. And as this peace settles, you begin to understand something quietly. You are no longer searching for control. You have it within you, always. Something profound happens. The emptiness fades. Not because someone filled it, but because you no longer depend on it. You feel whole, grounded, enough. Love is no longer a need. It becomes a natural extension of who you are. And for the first time, you experience freedom within connection. There comes a moment in your inner journey where something shifts so quietly, you almost miss it. At first, you still expect the emptiness to return. You still wait for that familiar feeling, the one that used to rise when things were quiet, when connection felt uncertain, when presence felt fragile. But this time, it doesn't arrive the same way. It feels distant, muted, almost like a memory of an old version of you, rather than something you are currently living. And you pause, because something feels different. Not outside of you, but inside of you. A subtle stillness, where there used to be longing. A quiet fullness, where there used to be searching. You are not trying to fill a space anymore, because the space is no longer empty. And this realization does not come from someone entering your life. It comes from you, no longer needing someone to complete it. For so long, you believed love was something that had to arrive from outside. Something that would fix the internal ache. Something that would finally silence the quiet question inside you. Am I enough? And because of that belief, you reached. You adjusted. You overgave. You overthought. You tried to become someone who could finally be chosen, finally be held, finally be enough for someone else to stay. But beneath all of it, there was always a subtle tension. A hidden dependence. Not on a person, but on what they represented. Validation. Safety. Completion. And so every connection carried weight. Expectation. Fear. Subtle pressure. Because without realizing it, you were asking others to complete something within you that you had not yet learned to hold yourself. And this is where the pattern lived. Not in love itself, but in dependence. In the silent belief that without someone else, something in you would remain incomplete. And that belief shaped everything. How you attached. How you reacted. How you feared loss. Because when something feels like your source of wholeness, the thought of losing it feels like losing yourself. And so you held on. Even when it hurt. Even when it drained you. Even when it confused you. But now, something is different. You begin to notice that the urgency is gone. The grasping is softer. The emotional dependence is loosening. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started feeling something deeper than care. Presence. You are here, without needing anything to complete the moment. And in this presence, something unexpected appears. Wholeness. Not loud. Not dramatic. But steady. Like a quiet foundation that was always beneath everything, but previously covered by layers of need. And now, those layers are dissolving. Because you are no longer feeding them. You are no longer reinforcing the belief that something is missing. And your subconscious mind begins to adjust. Because it does not resist repetition, it follows it. So when you repeatedly experience yourself as whole, it begins to accept wholeness as your default state. Not as a concept, but as identity. And this changes everything. Because now, when you connect with others, you are not reaching from emptiness. You are not trying to be completed. You are not silently negotiating your worth. You are simply present. And from presence, something very different emerges. Love, without dependency. Connection, without fear. Closeness, without collapse. You begin to feel relationships differently. Not as something you lose yourself in, but something you participate in. From stability, not survival. And this stability is not something you created through force. It emerged through awareness, through observation, through repeatedly seeing the pattern, without feeding it. And now, it begins to dissolve. Not instantly, but inevitably. Because every time you do not react from need, you weaken the old identity. And every time you remain grounded in yourself, you strengthen the new one. Until slowly, you are no longer someone who seeks love to feel whole. You are someone who expresses love from wholeness. And this is the turning point. Because love is no longer a transaction. It is no longer a negotiation of worth. It becomes expression. Natural. Unforced. Unfiltered. You give, not because you need to be seen, but because you are full. You connect, not because you are searching, but because you are present. And in this state, something profound happens. The fear of losing connection begins to fade. Because you are no longer depending on it to define you. If it is present, you appreciate it. If it is absent, you remain whole. And this is freedom. Not detachment. Not avoidance. But inner sufficiency. A quiet knowing that nothing external determines your completeness. And as this settles deeper into your system, your identity continues to shift. You are no longer the one who needs love to feel secure. You are the one who carries security into love. And this changes how you are perceived and how you perceive. Because people no longer feel a pull of need from you. They feel presence. They feel groundedness. They feel clarity. And this creates a different kind of connection. One that is not built on fear, but on authenticity. And in this authenticity, something opens. Space. Space to be yourself, without performance. Space to allow others, without dependency. Space to experience connection, without losing yourself in it. And this space is powerful. Because it allows love to exist, without distortion. Without pressure. Without expectation. Without fear of loss shaping every moment. And in that space, love becomes lighter. Not because it is less meaningful, but because it is no longer burdened by need. And you begin to realize something quietly profound. You were never missing love. You were experiencing it through the lens of lack. And now, that lens is clearing. And as it clears, love remains. But now, it feels different. More stable. More real. More free. And you begin to trust it, without clinging to it. Because you trust yourself, more than the outcome. And that changes everything. Not just in relationships, but within you. Because now, you are no longer waiting to be completed. You are already whole. And from wholeness, everything becomes different. Even the way you say, I love you. It is no longer a request. It is an expression. A reflection of something already complete within you. And as this understanding settles, you begin to sense something deeper unfolding. Not just about love, but about identity itself. Because if you are already whole, you are no longer the person you once believed yourself to be. The old patterns feel distant, almost unfamiliar. A new identity has formed, calm, aware, intentional. Not forced, but cultivated from within. And now your life begins to reflect this quiet transformation. There comes a point in your inner journey when something subtle, yet undeniable, begins to happen. You look at your old reactions, and they no longer feel like you. They feel distant. Familiar, but no longer alive in the same way. As if they belong to a version of you that existed in another state of awareness. And you pause without fully understanding why. Because something has changed. Not externally, but internally. The way you think, the way you respond, the way you interpret your experiences, has begun to reorganize itself. Quietly, naturally, without force. You are no longer pulled into every emotional wave the same way. You are no longer driven by old impulses as quickly as before. There is a gap now, between stimulus and reaction. And in that gap, something new has formed. Awareness. And with awareness, comes choice. But what is even more profound, is that you are not choosing from the old identity anymore. You are choosing from something new. Something quieter. Something more grounded. And this is where you begin to notice it. The old patterns still exist in memory, but not in dominance. the need to react quickly, the need to prove yourself, the need to be seen in a certain way. These no longer control the center of your experience. They appear, but they do not define you. And this creates a subtle shift in identity, because you are no longer acting from who you were. You are acting from who you are becoming. And this becoming is not chaotic. It is structured, like a system rewriting itself through repetition and awareness. Each time you pause instead of reacting, you reinforce the new pattern. Each time you observe instead of judge, you strengthen inner clarity. Each time you choose consciously, you deepen your new identity. And slowly, without realizing it fully, you begin to embody a different version of yourself. One that does not feel forced. One that does not feel constructed. But one that feels natural. And this is important, because true transformation does not feel like becoming someone else. It feels like remembering who you are, without distortion. You begin to notice changes in your emotional landscape. Situations that once triggered you now feel softer. Thoughts that once spiraled now pass through more easily. Reactions that once defined you now feel optional. And this optionality is powerful, because it means you are no longer inside the reaction. You are observing it. And from observation, you can choose. Not from fear, not from habit, but from presence. And as this continues, your subconscious begins to reorganize itself. Because the subconscious does not understand identity through words. It understands repetition, emotion, experience. So when you repeatedly experience yourself as calm, as aware, as intentional, it begins to accept this as your default state. Not because you forced it, but because you embodied it. And slowly, the old identity loses structural strength. It is not erased. It simply becomes inactive, like a program that is no longer being run. And in its place, a new structure emerges, one that is quieter, more stable, more aligned. You start noticing it in small moments, when something unexpected happens, and you remain steady. When emotional tension rises, and you breathe instead of react. When confusion appears, and instead of spiraling, you pause. These are not small changes. They are identity-level shifts, because your identity is not defined by what you think about yourself, but by what you consistently do under pressure. And now, under pressure, you are different. Not perfect, not disconnected, but aware. And awareness changes everything, because awareness gives you space. Space to interrupt old patterns. Space to choose new responses. Space to observe without becoming. And in this space, the new identity strengthens. Calm, aware, intentional. Not as a performance, but as a state of being. And as this state deepens, something else begins to happen. Your external life starts to reflect the internal shift. Not instantly, not dramatically, but subtly. You notice different types of conversations entering your life. Different emotional dynamics unfolding. Different responses from people around you. Not because the world changed, but because your internal frequency changed. You are no longer reacting from old emotional patterns. You are responding from clarity. And clarity changes how you are perceived. But more importantly, it changes how you perceive yourself. Because now, you trust your responses more. You trust your pauses. You trust your awareness. You trust your ability to remain grounded. And this trust builds inner stability. A quiet confidence that does not require validation. Because it is not based on outcome. It is based on presence. And presence is enough. You begin to feel something unfamiliar yet natural. A sense of being aligned within yourself. No longer divided between impulse and intention. No longer pulled between reaction and awareness. But unified. Whole in your own experience. And from this wholeness, your decisions become clearer. Not forced. Not overanalyzed. But intuitive. As if something within you knows the direction before your thoughts catch up. And you begin to realize, this is not a new personality. This is a return to something simpler. Something unfiltered. Something grounded in awareness rather than conditioning. And as you continue to live from this state, your old identity fades further into the background. Not erased, but irrelevant. Because it no longer reflects who you are in this moment. And you no longer return to it unconsciously. This is where transformation becomes irreversible. Not because you locked it in, but because you stopped feeding the old structure. And when a system is no longer reinforced, it dissolves on its own, quietly, naturally, without struggle. And now, there is a deeper calm in you. Not because life is easier, but because you are no longer resisting life internally. You are meeting it with awareness instead of reaction. And this changes everything. Because you are no longer trying to become someone different. You are simply expressing what is already emerging within you. And that expression feels authentic, stable, real. And as you sit with this awareness, you begin to sense something even deeper beneath it all. A foundation within you that does not change with identity shifts. A quiet observer that has always been there, watching, aware, steady. And you begin to wonder if that part of you has always been here. After everything, you arrive at a simple truth. What you were seeking was always within you. Not hidden but unnoticed. Now you see clearly. You are not chasing life anymore. You are creating it moment by moment. There is a moment at the end of every inner journey where everything becomes quiet. Not empty, but clear. And in that clarity, something simple reveals itself. Almost too simple to notice at first. You stop searching. Not because you found everything outside of you, but because you realize something deeper. What you were searching for was never missing. It was always present. Just overlooked, hidden in plain sight. Beneath the noise of thoughts. Beneath the weight of emotions. Beneath the constant movement of seeking. Was there. You were never separate from it. And now, you begin to see it clearly. Not as an idea, but as experience. Because the chasing begins to slow. The reaching begins to soften. The internal urgency dissolves. And something new emerges in its place. Stillness. Not passive stillness, but aware stillness. The kind that observes everything without needing to change everything immediately. And in this stillness, you realize something profound. You were never chasing life itself. You were chasing a feeling that life was supposed to give you. Safety, wholeness, meaning, love, validation. And because you believed those things were outside of you, you moved toward them constantly. Through effort, through expectation, through emotional dependency on outcomes. But now, that structure begins to collapse. Not suddenly, but naturally. Because awareness dissolves illusion without force. And the illusion was simple. That you were incomplete without something external. But now, you see the pattern. Every time you believed something outside would complete you, you moved away from what was already within you. And this movement created tension. A subtle sense of lack, even in moments of gain. Because nothing external can resolve an internal misunderstanding. And now, the misunderstanding is dissolving. You begin to notice something different in your inner experience. The constant projection into the future slows down. The mental replay of the past loosens its grip. And what remains is presence. Just this moment. Uncomplicated. Unfiltered. And in this presence, you begin to feel something you may not have recognized before. Sufficiency. Not because everything is perfect, but because nothing is missing in this moment. And that realization changes the structure of your mind. Because your subconscious does not distinguish between truth and repeated perception. It builds reality based on what you consistently experience as true. So when you repeatedly experience sufficiency, it becomes your internal reference point, not as belief, but as state. And from this state, something shifts in how you move through life. You are no longer approaching life as something to obtain something from. You are interacting with life as something you are part of. Not separate, not incomplete, but integrated. And this integration removes pressure. Because there is nothing to chase anymore. Nothing to complete. Nothing to become in order to be enough. And in that absence of pressure, clarity emerges. You begin to see your thoughts more clearly. Not as commands, but as patterns. You begin to feel your emotions more fully. Not as identity, but as energy moving through awareness. And this awareness gives you space. Space to respond instead of react. Space to choose instead of repeat. Space to create instead of chase. And slowly, you realize something even deeper. You are not just experiencing life. You are participating in its formation. Moment by moment. Through attention. Through thought. Through emotional alignment. And this participation is not something you start. It is something you recognize. Because it has been happening all along. But unconsciously. Automatically. Now, it becomes conscious. And this is the turning point. Because when awareness becomes conscious, creation becomes intentional. You begin to notice how quickly your internal world responds to your focus. A thought held gently begins to shape feeling. A feeling repeated begins to shape belief. A belief reinforced begins to shape experience. And suddenly, life is no longer something happening to you. It is something happening through you. And this realization does not create pressure. It creates responsibility. Not heavy responsibility, but empowering responsibility. Because now you understand the mechanism. You are not waiting for change. You are participating in it. And this changes how you think. Instead of reacting unconsciously, you pause. Instead of assuming lack, you observe what is present. Instead of reinforcing old patterns, you introduce new ones. Gently, consistently, without force. You begin to think differently about your inner dialogue. Not as random noise, but as instructions to the subconscious system. And so you become more intentional. You choose thoughts that align with the state you are cultivating. Not because you are forcing positivity, but because you are understanding structure. And with time, this structure stabilizes. The mind becomes less reactive. The emotions become more fluid. The identity becomes more flexible. And you begin to feel something subtle but powerful. Agency. Not control over everything, but influence over yourself. And from that influence, life begins to reorganize. Not instantly, but inevitably. Because when your internal pattern changes, your external experience follows. Not as magic, but as alignment. And in this alignment, you begin to feel more grounded than ever before. Because you are no longer waiting for life to validate you. You are meeting life from within yourself. Present, aware. And this presence becomes your new foundation. You are no longer seeking meaning. You are generating meaning. Through attention, through awareness, through participation. And this changes everything. Even the way you relate to others. Because now, you are not entering relationships from need. You are entering from fullness. Not to complete yourself, but to share yourself. And this shift transforms connection. Because when there is no need, there is space. Space for authenticity. Space for truth. Space for presence. And in that space, something real can exist. Not dependency. Not projection. But connection. And as you sit with this understanding, you realize something quietly profound. The life you were chasing was never outside of you. It was always being created through you. And now, you finally see it. Not as theory, but as lived experience. And in this seeing, there is no urgency left. Only awareness. Only presence. Only creation.